Was shooting with Eddie Knowles in Malani when I heard of the tiger, which later received official recognition as the Champawat Monitor. Eddie, who will long be remembered in this province as a sportsman par excellence and the possessor of an inexhaustible fund of shikar yarns, was one of those few and very fortunate individuals who possess the best of everything in life. His rifle was without equal in accuracy and striking power, and while one of his brothers was the best gun shot in India, another brother was the best tennis player in the Indian Army. When therefore Eddie informed me that his brother-in-law, the best shikari in the world, had been deputed by government to shoot the Champawat Monitor, it was safe to assume that a very definite period had been put to the animal's activities. The tiger, however, for some inexplicable reason, did not die and was causing government a great deal of anxiety when I visited Nainital 4 years later. Rewards were offered, special shikaris employed, and parties of Gurkhas sent out from the depot in Almora. Yet in spite of these measures, the toll of human victims continued to mount alarmingly. The tigress, for such the animal turned out to be, had arrived in Kumaon as a full-fledged man-eater from Nepal, from whence she had been driven out by a body of armed Nepals after she had killed 200 human beings, and during the 4 years she had been operating in Kumaon had added 234 to this number. This is how matters stood when shortly after my arrival in Nainital I received a visit from Bert Howd. Bert Howd, who was Deputy Commissioner of Nainital at that time, and who after his tragic death now lies buried in an obscure grave in Haldwani, was a man who was loved and respected by all who knew him, and it is not surprising therefore that when he told me of the trouble the man-eater was giving the people of his district and the anxiety it was causing him, he took my promise with him that I would start for Champawat immediately on receipt of news of the next human killed. Two conditions I made, however, one that the government rewards be cancelled, and the other that the special shikaris and regulars from Almora be withdrawn. My reasons for making these conditions need no explanation, for I am sure all sportsmen share my aversion to being classed as a reward hunter and are as anxious as I am to avoid the risk of being accidentally shot. These conditions were agreed to, and a week later Bert Howd paid me an early morning visit and informed me that news had been brought in during the night by runners that a woman had been killed by the man-eater at Pali, a village between Dabidhura and Dhunaghat. In anticipation of a start at short notice, I had engaged 6 men to carry my camp kit, and leaving after breakfast, we did a march the first day of 20 miles to Dhari. Breakfasting at Mornola next morning, we spent the night at Dabidhura and arrived at Pali the following evening, 5 days after the woman had been killed. The people of the village, numbering some 50 men, women and children, were in a state of abject terror, and though the sun was still up when I arrived, I found the entire population inside their homes behind locked doors. And it was not until my men had made a fire in the courtyard and I was sitting down to a cup of tea that a door here and there was cautiously opened and the frightened inmates emerged. I was informed that for 5 days no one had gone beyond their own doorsteps. The insanitary condition of the courtyard testified to the truth of this statement that food was running short, and that the people would starve if the tiger was not killed or driven away. That the tiger was still in the vicinity was apparent. For 3 nights it had been heard calling on the road, distant 100 yards from the houses, and that way day it had been seen on the cultivated land at the lower end of the village. The headman of the village very willingly placed a room at my disposal, But as there were 8 of us to share it, and the only door it possessed opened onto the insanitary courtyard, I elected to spend the night in the open. After a scratch meal which had to do duty for dinner, I saw my men safely shut into the room, and myself took up a position on the side of the road, with my back to a tree. The villagers said the tiger was in the habit of perambulating along this road, and as the moon was at the full, I thought there was a chance of my getting as hot provided I saw it first. I had spent many nights in the jungle looking for game, but this was the first time I had ever spent a night looking for a man-eater. The length of road immediately in front of me was brilliantly lit by the moon, but to right and left the overhanging trees cast dark shadows, and when the night wind agitated the branches and the shadows moved, I saw a dozen tigers advancing on me, and bitterly regretted the impulse that had induced me to place myself at the man-eater's mercy. I lacked the courage to return to the village and admit I was too frightened to carry out my self-imposed task, and with teeth chatter as much from fear as from cold, I sat out the long night. As the grey dawn was lighting up the snowy range which I was facing, I rested my head on my drawn-up knees, and it was in this position my men an hour later found me fast asleep. Of the tiger I had neither heard nor seen anything. Back in the village I tried to get the men who I could see were very surprised I had survived the night to take me to the places where the people of the village had from time to time been killed, but this they were unwilling to do. From the courtyard they pointed out the direction in which the kills had taken place. The last kill, the one that had brought me to the spot I was told, had taken place round the shoulder of the hill to the west of the village. The women and girls, some 20 in number, who had been out collecting oak leaves for the cattle when the unfortunate woman had been killed, were eager to give me details of the occurrence. It appeared that the party had set out 2 hours before midday and, after going half a mile, had climbed into trees to cut leaves. The victim and 2 other women had selected a tree growing on the edge of a ravine, which I subsequently found was about 4 feet deep and 10 to 12 feet wide. Having cut all the leaves she needed, the woman was climbing down from the tree when the tiger, who had approached unseen, stood up on its hind legs and caught her by the foot. Her hold was torn from the branch she was letting herself down by, and pulling her into the ravine, the tiger released her foot, and while she was struggling to rise, caught her by the throat. After killing her, it sprang up the side of the ravine and disappeared with her into some heavy undergrowth. Arrived at the ravine in which the woman had been killed, the very important question of what next was being debated, when the tiger interrupted the proceedings by emitting a loud roar from the bushes 30 yards away. A Sanmanth party turned and fled helter-skelter back to the village. When breath had been regained, accusations were made against one and another of having been the first to run and cause the stampede.